All right, this section is, there's a lot of things here, a lot of angles that we can discuss here. And so we're going to look at the next section here, the high priest in the line of Aaron. And this section primarily, I just want to point out to you that the Bible has an accurate historical record of all of the high priests from the time of Aaron, the first high priest, all the way through to the days of the fall of Jerusalem. And then it has an accurate record from there until at least sometime around the Hasmonean dynasty. From that time period on, if you remember that, if you've studied that at all, it is havoc in the priesthood. They're all buying each other off and buying the Seleucid rulers off for the position. Whoever had the most money pretty much was going to be the high priest. So it's not very legitimate at that point. But anyway, so the high priests in the line of Aaron, these are the ones who ruled over Israel. They actually not only ruled over Israel, but they co-ruled, in many cases, ruled over Israel. The position of the high priest, of course, in the days of Christ, that was still a position at that point. There was Annas and Caiaphas and so on. That priesthood. There was plenty of evidence of that even in the days of Christ. Anyway, they assumed the line of authority, and there definitely was one. There definitely was a line of authority. So the Bible lists 21 high priests of Israel from Aaron to Sariah, who was the high priest when Jerusalem was destroyed in 586. The Bible tells us in 2 Kings chapter 25. So let's turn there. 2 Kings chapter 25, verse number 18. The Bible tells us here that Sariah, the high priest, was killed when Babylon conquered Jerusalem. Chapter 25, verse 18. And the captain of the guard took Sariah the chief priest and Zephaniah the second priest and the three keepers of the door. And out of the city he took an officer that was set over the men of war and 5 men of them that were in the king's presence. And so on. He took these, verse 20, and brought them to the king of Babylon to Riblah. That's the main garrison of soldiers, not back in the land of Babylon, but further away from Jerusalem. The king of Babylon smote them and slew them. Okay, so here's the high priest being put to death by the Babylonians. Jehozadak was the high priest during the exile of Babylon. Scriptures show this follow, and there's a number of verses there. The number of high priests are known after Sariah. Jehozadak is the son of Sariah. We'll list out all of these in just a bit there on number 3. Jehozadak, the son of Sariah, he would be number 22 in the line. You say, well, how do you know that? Because of 1 Chronicles chapter 6. The time span from Aaron to Sariah is not precisely known, but a very good estimate can be made. There are approximately 350 years from Aaron to David and 414 years from David to the destruction of the temple. So about 750 years, 22 high priests. Okay, so we know that. That's accurate biblical historical records. So turn to 1 Chronicles chapter 6. 1 Chronicles chapter 6. Children of Amram, verse 3. Aaron and Moses and Miriam, the sons also of Aaron, Nadab and Abihu, Eleazar and Ithamar. Those 4 sons of Aaron were all priests. And, of course, a couple of different lines. Eleazar's line, by the way, is Eli's line. That would be wiped out eventually. But anyway, on page 1 there, I highlighted the high priests for you. Okay, so Aaron, Eleazar, Phinehas, Abishua, I don't know how to, Bucky. Believe it or not, I had a kid in my school growing up. His name was Bucky. Bucky. Unbelievable. I'm sure that's pronounced wrong. Uzi, I like that one. Zerahiah, Meraioth, Amariah, Ahitub. By the way, Ahitub and Zadok and Ahimaaz, those are all around the time of David, if I remember right. Azariah, Johanan, Azariah, Amariah, another Ahitub, Zadok, Shalom, Hilkiah, Azariah, Sariah, the one who was killed by Nebuchadnezzar and the Babylonians, to Jehozadak. They go by several different names. The Bible gives us a couple of those that have different names but the same person. Jeshua and Joshua are the same high priest. Jehozadak and Josadak are the same person. Okay, so this is a listing here of all of the priests, the high priests, literally from Aaron to the fall of Jerusalem. Isn't that neat? I don't know, to me, that just, I think that's an amazing, you read through this and you say, oh yeah, well, whatever. But when you stop to realize that they have accurate records of every high priest for 750 years, okay, that's pretty significant. The children of Israel, the Jews, have always been big on history, on their genealogies. Okay, of course, their history is special, you know, it's in the Bible. But still, their genealogies, much of what we find in the Bible, especially in the historical section, are the Jews taking pride in their history. Okay, so it's important to understand this history is accurate. It's for 750 years. You have a question or a comment?
So there's two lines of priests that it seems like went back and forth in the Old Testament, right? Eleazar and I guess, are these all under the same line, or did that keep switching back and forth?
It's some of it switched back and forth, but it's definitely all under the sons of Aaron.
Sure.
And they're all high priests. So yes, they do switch back and forth a little bit.
Do you know when
Absolutely.
they restore the temple eventually? Like not just the second temple or the third temple institute, but like biblically, which line?
You mean in the New Testament?
Or no, like in the prophecies.
Oh.
What line will it have to come from?
Oh, man.
Or does it not really matter?
Okay. I'm almost positive. Okay, let me think. There have been several stories here recently I've heard of. The name Cohen, C-O-H-E-N, not Mrs. Nancy Cohen in our church, but C-O-A-N is her name. But the name Cohen is a Jewish name, and I've heard rumors that is a name that fits into the Aaronic priesthood, and that supposedly is the same family still. I have a hard time believing that. I really believe that the Bible teaches that the history, the records of Israel as a whole have been wiped out. You know, they, as a people, they've lost almost all of their records as far as tracing it through the last 2,000 years. I really believe that. That's part of the punishment, I believe. So the answer, I believe, to your question is, who's going to fulfill the high priesthood? It's Jesus Christ. It's Jesus Christ. He's not of the line of Aaron. He's of the line of who? Melchizedek. So you don't need a priest in the line of Aaron. And I don't believe there is one, no matter what. And I've heard several accounts of Jews, Jewish sources, who claim that they have someone who is still in the line of Aaron. And I just don't believe that to be the case. Jesus Christ is not of the line of Aaron, obviously. He's in the line of Judah, not the tribe of Levi. Okay. All right, any other questions, comments there? All right, we're going to continue a little bit further now with that. There are some more high priests. Number 2 there, the outer number 2. The Bible lists the genealogy of the high priests after the exile. Okay, so that was, all those 22 are up to the exile. Now the Bible lists some more high priests after the exile. Now I'll say here, it's not quite as clear. There's several that possibly are missing, or there's several that are father or grandfather. It's not very clear. Sometimes when the Bible says son of so-and-so, it's actually saying the grandson of so-and-so. The father, the patriarchal position takes precedence, the grandfather. Anyway, Josedek is listed along with his son Jeshua to at least an additional 5 generations. The last high priest listed in the Old Testament. Okay, now that doesn't mean in the intertestamental period, but the last high priest listed in the Old Testament is one named Jaddua. Jeshua, along with Zerubbabel, were commissioned to oversee the rebuilding of the temple. Joshua, the same person. All right, so let's talk about these high priests after the exile. By the way, I'm not going to ask you to know all the high priests. You will need to know how many. You'll need to know who the first one was and the last one at least before the exile, and then some things about some of these during the exile. So the scriptures to show these at least 7 high priests are in 1 Chronicles chapter 6, verse 15. Let's go back to 14. Azariah begat Sariah, that's the one who was killed by Nebuchadnezzar. Sariah begat Jehozadak. Jehozadak went into captivity. Okay, so he was a high priest in Babylon. Right? It's not very fitting. There's no temple there. But as the high priest went to Babylon, it's important to understand that the high priest position takes on a new role during this time period. Okay, by the time you get to the New Testament, the high priest is not necessarily the one in the temple making the main sacrifice, like Aaron had done. The high priest is more of a political leader. He's more of a civil ruler rather than leading the sacrifice, rather than a religious leader only. And it's because of this time period. Verse 15, when the Lord carried away Judah and Jerusalem by the hand of Nebuchadnezzar. So he went into captivity. All right. Zechariah chapter 6, verse 11. Zechariah, of course, is one of the last of the Old Testament prophets. Haggai and Zechariah were those two prophets who were working, let's see here, about 520 BC when they were trying to convince the people to rebuild the temple. Zechariah chapter 6, verse 11, then take silver and gold and make crowns and set them upon the head of Joshua the son of Josedek the high priest. Okay, so he's putting a crown, a civil crown, he's making this high priest a civil leader. You don't have a king, so he's making this priest a civil leader also. Nehemiah chapter 12. Nehemiah chapter 12. We'll list them out for you next there. As far as the actual 7. Nehemiah chapter 12, verse number 1. Now these are the priests and the Levites that went up with Zerubbabel, the son of Shealtiel, and Jeshua. Who's Jeshua? The son of Josedek. So Josedek had gone into captivity. His son, Joshua, will return with Nehemiah. I'm sorry, with Zerubbabel, not with Nehemiah. Nehemiah writes about it. It was long before Nehemiah. Okay, so mention here again of the high priest, Joshua. Look at verse 10, chapter 12, verse 10. Here's a listing now of Jeshua's sons and grandsons. And Jeshua begat Joachim. Joachim also begat Eliashib. Eliashib begat Joiada. Joiada begat Jonathan, and Jonathan begat Jaddua. There's the last of the high priests, listed out. So Nehemiah makes it a point to list out for us the high priests that would be ruling during this time period. All right, now you have, as I do, some of the listing of some of these people. What happened to him? Josedek was taken to Babylon. We don't know his end. Joshua returned to Israel with Zerubbabel. He became the high priest in 515 after the temple was completed. Joshua. His son Joachim would be the high priest when Nehemiah returns. Sorry, is that right? 12:10, 12:12, and 12:26. Yes, Nehemiah the governor. Nehemiah, let's see here. The first time when Nehemiah actually returns was probably about 444. So, actually, Joachim would probably not have, according to the time period, not have overlap with Nehemiah. Eliashib is the high priest mentioned in Nehemiah chapter 13. Do you remember anything about Eliashib? I'm sure you recognize the name if you remember reading through this story, last class period, I guess. And before this, Eliashib the priest, that's the high priest, having the oversight of the chamber of the house of our God, was allied unto Tobiah. So Eliashib was this bad high priest who allowed the enemy of God, Tobiah, to live in a chamber of the house of God. And of course, Nehemiah didn't like that very much. And he comes in there and throws him out, throws his stuff out in the yard. Yes?
I've read that, what is it, Eliashib, that he was married to someone in Tobiah's family.
That's right. I remember that. I don't remember where that's at.
And I think the word allied, I guess it means like married to.
Yes. More connected than just making an agreement.
Exactly.
Yeah. Yes, I've read that. I don't remember where that is, but I believe that is the case. Oh, I have it right here. Joiada. One of his sons married a daughter. No, that's something else. Sorry. But he had married a daughter of Sanballat, the Horonite, for which he was driven out of the temple by Nehemiah. Okay, so there it is. Jonathan, Jaddua. So we don't know much about those, except Jonathan has a different name as well. The chronology given above is some based on Josephus and some on the Bible. However, it's not undisputed, with some alternatively placing Jaddua during the time of Darius II, and some supposing one more Johanan or Jonathan and one more Jaddua in the following time. So there is some debate over whether there was at least one or two, possibly two more high priests during this time. Okay? All right, there you go. There's your section on the high priesthood before the exile and then during the exile. And up to the time of Jaddua. That would take us completely into the intertestamental time period. All right, so there's your section on the test. That's where the test will stop right there for next Thursday. Okay, now our next section is a very, very exciting, interesting section. Turn, if you would, to the book of Daniel. We're going to spend the rest of our time today here in the book of Daniel. I want to look at Daniel's prophecies concerning some of these major world players on the world scene during the Second Temple period. I know typically we focus, don't we, on the Jews. We focus on the Bible stories and how they relate. But some of, obviously, Daniel's prophecies, Daniel was interested in not just what was happening with Israel, but also he was interested in what was happening with all these other nations. God showed it to him. In fact, many of the prophets, if you stop and think about it, prophesied not only about Israel, but also about other countries around Israel. So God isn't interested in only Israel. He's interested in the world, and so he prophesies. Who is it? Amos prophesying against, he prophesied in the northern kingdom. But one of them prophesied against Edom and against Tyre and Sidon, and they prophesied against Babylon and so on and so on. Who was it? I thought you.
I think Haggai. I'm not sure.
No, maybe. So they were interested in other nations than just Israel. And Daniel's definitely that way. Obviously, we have all kinds of things about the rise of Alexander the Great, the Babylonian, well, not the Babylonians, the Medes and the Persians, and the Romans, even some things about, I believe, about the Romans, and a lot of other nations than just Israel. Okay, so we know in the book of Daniel, chapter 2, chapter 8, and chapter 11. Chapter 2 is the story of the king's dream, and it had to do with this huge figure that was made of different components as you go down his body. The head of gold, and so on. You go down the thing. And so we're going to touch on these just real quickly. I'm not going to do an entire lesson on the book of Daniel. That's for a different class. But the age of Babylon is, I believe, represented in Daniel chapter 2 by this head of gold that Daniel saw, or that the king saw, and Daniel interpreted for the king in his dream. Head of gold, the city of Babylon is called the Golden City. Isaiah chapter 14, verse 4. Babylon was used by God, of course, to punish Israel and bring them back. The kingdom of Babylon covered from Egypt to the Persian Gulf and all the way up into Turkey, and then straight east over to India. Huge area. The city of Babylon supposedly is known for its gold. The Greek historian Herodotus, when he traveled around the known world of that time, he visited Babylon. By the way, a lot of what we believe about the city of Babylon, remember in your video, you probably remember seeing this, comes from the stories that Herodotus wrote. And some of those are probably exaggerated, but the Hanging Gardens and things like that, a lot of his stories were proven to be true by archaeology. But he said that he had never seen more gold anywhere than he saw in Babylon. He claimed more than 22 tons of gold he saw. That's his estimate of what he saw. So Babylon, Daniel called it, I believe, he likened it to the head on that statue of gold, Babylon. And then you go down, the next is the chest of silver. Medo-Persian Empire, I believe, is the representation of that. Silver is normally likened to be inferior to gold. Of course, if you'd rather have silver than gold, you're crazy. Who doesn't want gold, right? Was the Medo-Persian Empire inferior to the Babylonians?
Yes.
Yes. In what way?
Splendor and glory and all that stuff.
Okay. It wasn't inferior by territory. Okay, they occupied about the same amount of territory as Nebuchadnezzar had. It wasn't inferior by wealth, it's not believed, because they did have huge wealth. But it was definitely, and you could debate that, second one, but it was definitely inferior because of the kings after Cyrus. Okay, I'm going to look at a little bit of this the continual war along the Palestinian front between 538 and 323. We're going to actually name quickly through all of the kings of Persia. Probably not today, but we'll get to those eventually. And we'll see these sorry kings. A lot of historians have written about the Persian kings, and they are a vile group of people and very incompetent and so on. I don't think I have it on your section there. Prideaux, I'm not sure where he's from, a historian though. He called the kings of Persia the worst race of kings that ever governed an empire. I have a lot here I'm going to read to you in just a second. The son of Cyrus. Cyrus was a great king. The first of the Medo-Persian kings came in. Of course, Daniel was still alive. He was probably a great king. He conquered Babylon. Okay, that in itself is obviously a huge feat. But the remarkable defeats, starting with the son of Cyrus and going all the way through to Alexander the Great, it seems like just almost every one of them, including Esther's husband. He was a buffoon. Okay? If you look at some of the things that he does, and they would just say things and do things just on a whim. But anyway, these Persian kings suffered unbelievable defeats in the military campaigns which were undertaken. What was their main battles during the Persian Empire? Against whom? Against the Greeks, primarily. Also against the Egyptians and so on. Let me just read to you. The Assyrian or Babylonian Empire was distinguished for victories by which it carried its arms around the then known world. The Medo-Persian Empire, after the reign of Cyrus, was almost as remarkable for the succession of defeats which have made the period of the world during which the empire continued so well known in history. It is probable that no kingdom ever undertook so many foolish projects in reference to the conquests of other nations, and yet they survived for almost 200 years. They had people, millions of them, and that's how they were able to even be successful in any regard. So many foolish projects in reference to the conquest of other nations. Projects so unwisely planned and resulting in so signal failures. Cambyses, the son of Cyrus. He invaded Egypt. His conduct there in carrying on the war was such as to make him be regarded as a madman. Enraged against the Ethiopians for an answer which they gave him, when under pretense of friendship he sent spies to examine their country, he resolved to invade their territory. He came to Thebes in Upper Egypt. He detached from his army 50,000 men to go south into Egypt or into Ethiopia, with orders to destroy their country and to burn the temple of Jupiter that stood in it. After marching a few days in the desert, they were overwhelmed in the sands. A sandstorm came up by a strong south wind, and all 50,000 disappeared. Okay? Things like this. They just do dumb things. You don't send 50,000 out without a lifeline, without some kind of supply line. Meantime, Cambyses marched with the rest of his army against the Ethiopians. Though he wanted all the means of subsistence for his army, until having devoured all their beasts of burden, they ate all their animals, they were constrained to designate every 10th man of the army to be killed and eaten to survive. In these deplorable circumstances, he finally returned to Thebes in Egypt, Upper Egypt, having lost a great part of his army in this wild expedition. It was also during the continuance of this kingdom that the ill-starred expeditions to Greece occurred. When Mardonius and Xerxes the first, the husband of Esther, poured the million of Asia on the countries of Greece and met such signal overthrows at Marathon and Salamis and so on. Huge defeats. Thermopylae, it said that the king sat up on the hill, Thermopylae, or is it Marathon, I forget, sat up on the hillside to watch his Persian army defeat these hated Greeks. And they vastly outnumbered the other army, and they were still defeated. I mean, it just is it's a norm to be defeated among them. Such a series of disasters never before had occurred to invading armies or made those who repelled invasion so illustrious. Right? It made the Greeks look great. Okay? I found here some pictures, or a map first. Here's a map of the Persian Empire this is Turkey, and then Greece. and a lot of the interaction here back and forth against the Greeks, and it goes on for about 150 something like that years. This supposedly is the modern site of where Thermopylae occurred. Now I don't know where the mountain pass where a few men were able to hold off the Persian army. Sorry? Sorry?
That was Sparta, right?
Oops, am I on the wrong one?
Oh no, that's right. I mean, they're part of Greece.
Yeah, okay, that's right. 300, yes. As I read about this picture, it said that it's believed that there used to be a huge section of a mountain pass right in this picture, and that most of it's been removed. I have no clue how. But anyway, so this is the site, though supposedly real close by where that took place. So I've gone online and looked up some, they put together these computer animated battles. You ever seen those? And you can actually watch how the Persians worked their battle fronts and so on. Very, very interesting in how the Greeks were able to defeat them, even though the Persians had vastly outnumbered the Greeks. Anyway, so the Persians made those who repelled invasion look illustrious. In this respect, there was an evident propriety in speaking of this as an inferior kingdom. Okay, so we say that to say the Persians are inferior. They're silver, not gold. The Babylonians are the gold standard, if you will. By the way, Persia was known for its silver currency and taxation paid in silver. Daniel chapter 11. And now will I show thee the truth. Here's Daniel in his prophecy. Behold, there shall stand up yet 3 kings in Persia, and the 4th shall be far richer than they all, and by his strength through his riches he shall stir up all against the realm of Grecia. This is just one example of the specific nature of the prophecies of Daniel. By the way, Daniel, the authorship of Daniel. You say, well, of course it was Daniel, right? But that's because you're a conservative, so you believe the Bible. The authorship of Daniel has really come under question by the Bible critics. And they like to say that Daniel didn't actually live the same Daniel that lived supposedly in Babylon and Persia, didn't actually write during that same time period. There has to be another Daniel by the same name or his pen name about 200 BC, not 450 or 500 or 550 BC. Has to be a different Daniel. You say, well, why? Because the book of Daniel, they say, was written as history, not as prophecy. Why did it say that? Because it's so specific. It's so detailed. This king of the Seleucid Empire went against this king, and the pictures of Alexander the Great as a goat and his feet not touching the ground. I'll tell you a little bit more about that in a second. The prophecies are too detailed. They're too specific. They must have been written as history. See what it does? You move the authorship to 200 rather than 500 BC, and then all of a sudden you change the perspective on it completely. Because surely God isn't capable of giving that kind of detailed prophecy. So, I'm kidding. Yes, he is. Yeah. Some of you are writing that down. God is not capable.
That's a good audio bit.
Yes, right. Okay, the next section in Daniel's interpretation. I keep thinking Daniel's vision, but it actually wasn't his vision. It was his interpretation of the king's dream. from Daniel 2. The next section in there is the abdomen and the thighs of brass, and that's a picture of Greece. Greece. Of course, the Greek culture being spread around the world was used by God to produce the Bible and the language of the world. So that's important. But the Greek soldier had a brass helmet, a brass breastplate, sword, and sheath. Okay, so the land of Greece was known for brass. Okay, it's interesting. By the way, that's actually named that Greece is that section of that vision, interpretation. Now, the next part are the legs of iron, and that's believed, it's the only one that's not directly named, but it's believed to be Rome. I've heard people that disagree with that, and I, whatever. But it's believed to be Rome. Iron is easily corrupted, but strong. It rusts easily. Now you think of Rome in that regard, easily corrupted, but very strong. It outlasted all the others for 500 years plus. The Roman Empire was united, and then for about 1,500 years it was divided, but still, yeah, you can hardly call that, right? The Roman Empire, the Roman Catholics. But anyway, this is believed to be the legs of iron, 150 BC or so to about 500 AD. Also, in these prophecies of Daniel, this doesn't have to do with that vision that he saw of the different levels, but it does have some of the animals. I want to mention at least a couple of these animals that Daniel sees in his visions. You have that on page 3. The ram. The ram. This is a picture of Persia. The ram is a picture of Persia. I didn't put any references on there, did I? I don't have time to go through all of these, but let's. Okay, go to chapter 7. Is it chapter 7? Nope, chapter 8. Chapter 8 mentions a ram, verse 3. I lifted up mine eyes and saw, and behold, there stood before the river a ram which had 2 horns, and the 2 horns were high, but one was higher than the other, and the higher came up last. I saw the ram pushing westward and northward and southward. Now, there's all kinds of fun things here to study, and we could go through the entire book of Daniel and see these kinds of things. But the ram, I believe, is a picture of Persia. The 2 horns is believed to be the Medes and the Persians. One was mightier than the other, one horn. The Persians were, Cyrus the Persian was mightier than Darius the Mede. The Persians were the dominant force of the combination. Cyrus pushed his way westward and northward and southward. All right. By the way, I think it's interesting. The ram is the national emblem of Persia. Okay? It's the national emblem of Persia. Just like we have an eagle, they had a ram on their coins. It was stamped on their coins, a picture of a ram, the head of a ram. It was embroidered on the emperor's headdress. It said that the guardian spirit of the Persian kingdom appears under the form of a ram with clean feet and sharp-pointed horns, and the Persian king, when he stood at the head of his army, bore instead of the diadem, he carried the actual head of a ram. And Daniel says, I saw a ram pushing westward. Okay. Daniel's prophecies are about Persia and these actual kingdoms that existed, or that were going to exist during that time period, this time period that we're discussing. The goat. The goat. The goat is a picture of Greece. Look in chapter 8 again. Hold on just a second. Let me write that down. The goat is a picture of Greece. As this ram is pushing around, trying to expand, no beast might stand before him. Is that me? I'm sorry. My phone isn't off. I saw the ram pushing, neither was there any that could deliver out of his hand, but he did according to his will and became great. And as I was considering, behold, an he-goat came from the west on the face of the whole earth, and touched not the ground. And the goat had a notable horn between his eyes, and he came to the ram that had two horns, which I had seen stand before the river, and ran unto him in the fear of his power. And I saw him come close unto the ram, and he was moved with choler against him, and smote the ram, and brake his two horns. And there was no power in the ram to stand before him, but he cast him down to the ground and stamped upon him. And there was none that could deliver the ram out of his hand. Therefore the he-goat waxed very great, and when he was strong, the great horn was broken, and for it came up four notable ones toward the four winds of heaven, and so on. All right. What? Prophecy?
Yes. Very, very blunt and detailed.
Yes. Very detailed. Obviously Greece. You say, well, how do you know that? Well, I believe this goat is a picture of not only Greece, but this goat not touching the ground. Alexander the Great. He's going so fast. If you study his army and his tactics, he was able to move unbelievably fast and attack and destroy and move on. Says that they touched not the ground. He was the son of Philip of Macedon. He was tutored by Aristotle. He led his first military expedition at the age of 16. Okay, so you're behind already. He was crowned king at 20. He defeated Darius of the Persian king at 26 years old. He died at 32 and a half, 33 years old. Why is Greece pictured as a goat? Greece, by the way, just as the Persian Empire had the ram as their emblem, you can imagine the emblem of the land of, or the country of Greece was the goat. Bronze goats with horns are the figures of Macedon. Their coin, one of their main coins, has the head of a one-horned goat. One-horned goat. That's weird, but it's Bible prophecy. And of course, about the four breaking up into the four, of course, fits the story of the empire of Alexander the Great going four directions, four different leaders. Okay? All right, so those are some of the prophecies, just some, a very few, just to give you the idea that Daniel prophesied about these kingdoms and that God was interested, God was involved in not just Judah, not just the land of Israel, but in all of the nations around the world. He's very interested in everything that's going on. All right, the next main section then that we're going to start into is the continual war along the Palestinian front between 538 and 323. Now, I know I'm going back a little bit. We've already discussed Nehemiah and Ezra and so on. But I want to look at now a continual war along this front. And Palestine, the land of Israel, is always caught in the middle of it. A lot of times as we read the Bible, and I mentioned this probably a month ago, as we read the Bible, we think that everything going on in the world has to do with Israel. And in a sense, it does, because that's what the Bible is primarily written about in the Old Testament. But from the perspective of these nations around them, I mean, they're just living life, you know. They want to attack somebody in the far east or the far west. They're going to pass basically through the land of Israel. Israel's that land bridge between the three major continents there. So when the Babylonians are attacking Egypt, they go through Israel. When, you know, Alexander the Great, as he's coming east to attack the Persians and to conquer them, Babylon, and all the way into India, in the meanwhile, he passes down through, conquers Jerusalem. He goes down to Egypt. Of course, you've heard of Alexandria, Egypt. Okay, that's named after Alexander the Great. He was there. He founded that city. He went on way down into the south of Egypt, several hundred miles to a major temple. And we'll discuss those things in a little bit later, but probably next class period, actually. But oh, my point is that Israel, from the perspective of these other nations, Israel's just kind of insignificant. They're there. But we know that from God's perspective, He used these outside nations to punish Israel or to get His point across to His people. All right, so the continual war along the Palestinian front between 538 and 323. So let's take this time period just real briefly. I'm not going to spend a huge amount of time on the Persian kings, but we want to quickly touch on these Persian kings up to the time of Alexander the Great. Okay, so that's the next thing. I'm going to actually stop there. I don't think I have time to finish this section. I'll stop there and we'll pick up with this in our next class period. So Cyrus the Great, and then we'll list out quickly each of those Persian kings and then take us up to Alexander the Great.